When the trailer for New Ark Line released last year, I remember loving the aesthetics of it and I thought the game looked like it could be a lot of fun. And about a week ago, they reached out to me and offered me the chance to preview the game before it released into early access. And I thought, sure, I mean, I was going to buy the game anyway, so yeah, I'd love to get it a week early. So what is New Ark Line? It's a CRPG, a tactical RPG in a fantasy meets steampunk setting. The game has strong Arcanum of Steamworks and Magic Obscura vibes. If you are a fan of that game, you will thoroughly enjoy the story and the setting of this game. It perfectly blends fantasy and steampunk together. I won't touch on the main story to avoid spoilers, but I'll give you a brief summary of the game's backstory, which should be enough to tell you about what to expect. The world was once ruled by mages known as Weavers, who held godlike powers. Eventually, magus and technologists were involved in a war known as the Mago Technology Wars. The technologists won the war and came to power, and the people who once supported the technologists in overthrowing the mages are now suffering under their rule as the invention of automatons has led to massive job layoffs, leading to many people living in poverty and without jobs. The game starts as your character is an immigrant traveling to the city of Newark in the New World, which is supposed to be this shining beacon of progress and technology, but in truth it's just as rotten and corrupt as everywhere else. Your character arrives in the port of Tatterhold as you're trying to smuggle some unknown magical artifact into Newark to meet with a buyer. There's your backstory, but how's the game itself? A big thing people love about these kinds of RPGs is the character customization, spending hours crafting and refining your character. Unfortunately, you won't get that here as the character creation, while nice, is very limited in the early access build. There's very few hairstyles and facial hairstyles to choose from. You only get 4 face types and you can't edit any individual parts of your face. And the 4 portraits you get to choose from for your character very likely won't match up with the appearance of the character you create, unless you stick close to the default appearance. There's only 2 races to choose from in the early access build. Human and elf are the only selectable races in character creation, but your first companion in the game is a giant, and your third companion is a dwarf. So I do fully expect dwarf and giant to be added as playable races in future updates. The tutorial area gives you an introduction to the dice rolls and skills, and I failed almost all of them, and some of those failures had me laughing. I watched a dwarf fall to his death as I lost my grip on bars he was hanging onto. I'm pretty sure a guy who was impaled by a metal bar bled to death because I couldn't find anything to help him, so I just wandered off and left him. A couple jumped to their deaths because I failed to convince them their lives were worth living. And after the tutorial, when I got into the game itself, the quests had me hooked. I failed to save a child from a magical spell from eating some kind of cursed candy, and now he's frozen in a trance, possibly forever. I found a love letter and then pretended to be the man in the letter, and then I ended the relationship on their first meeting. The quests had me hooked from the get-go. It was fun right from the start, and I was laughing right from the beginning of the game. As far as classes go, only 2 of the 6 classes are available in the early access build. You've got Diesel Engineer and Voodoo Shaman. Voodoo Shaman is a mage who focuses on hexes and curses. Now, admittedly, I didn't spend much time with the Shaman as I was having too much fun with the Diesel Engineer, who is your gunner class. The Diesel Engineer uses dual pistols and rifles. They've also got access to a jetpack which can be used in battle to temporarily increase your mobility. I thought the Diesel Engineer was a lot of fun. Bullets have a chance of ricocheting into other enemies, which is pretty cool. I did prefer the dual pistols over the rifles, particularly for the burst fire skill that I had on my set of pistols. It empties the entire magazine of each pistol into the enemy. It's insanely overpowered for instantly killing large, stronger enemies, and because the bullets have a chance of ricocheting into other enemies, it can easily kill a few weaker enemies at the same time. And as I mentioned, the Diesel Engineer gets access to a jetpack to increase your mobility in combat. You can double your movement points for a couple of turns, or you can fly a large distance away. Although I have to say I never found a need to actually use it in combat as I already had high movement points, due to putting a lot of skill points into my athletics skill, and because of that I was easily able to keep my range and stay at a safe distance. If you don't build heavily into athletics like I did, then I could definitely see the jetpack being a lifesaver in combat, and it definitely has tactical advantages. I did find that combat is easily abused with a gun, to the point that it removed much of the challenges from combat. There doesn't seem to be any boundaries to the battles, so I was able to keep my distance and have enemies chase me around the city as I safely pick them off one by one from a distance with my gun. I mentioned 6 classes earlier. The other 4 classes are Hellfire Occultist, Tesla Punk Scientist, and the other 2 classes we get glimpses of through our companions. Our first companion, Mick, is a Steam Mechanic, which is a melee-focused brawling class, and our third companion, Magda, is a Celestial Mage who focuses on healing magic. So we can expect those classes to be added in future updates. The companions themselves are fine, but nothing to write home about. Mick is with you from more or less the beginning of the game. He's got his pros and cons. He's your typical brawling brute, but he does have a soft spot for helping those in need. But he's also a criminal, so he has his bad moments too. You don't get to spend much time with the other 2 companions, as they both joined towards the end of the early access build, so it's unfair to judge them. But what little I did get to see of both Letta and Magda, I thought they were interesting characters. As for how the game controls, it's your standard turn-based combat game. If you've ever played a turn-based combat game with action points before, you know exactly what to expect out of this. You have limited movement per turn and limited actions for abilities per turn. A nice addition this game has over others of this genre is that every character has an armor bar over their health bar to absorb some damage, and this armor bar refills every turn. As for quests, the game gives you plenty of freedom to pursue and complete quests in whatever manner you please, and these quests often have moral grey areas. You can be the hero, you can be the villain, or you can be somewhere in between. You can try to peacefully resolve quests through persuasion and bribes. You can intimidate or mock them into giving up, or if that's not your style, as soon as the dialogue box opens up, you can pick a fight and go in all guns blazing. How you resolve quests can have consequences and potentially affect later quests. For example, I stumbled across a guy called Victor who was being attacked by a mob in a back alley. They were all factory workers, and Victor spoke out about how automation is the future. The other workers didn't take too kindly to what Victor was saying, and they were going to, let's just say, teach him a lesson. I jumped in, I talked the others down, and I convinced them to leave him alone and saved him. Later on, it turns out that that factory is run by some kind of gremlin goblin thing, and he also utilizes child labor from the local orphanage. Now you're faced with a dilemma. Keep the gremlin-looking magical goblin in power, which keeps everyone in a job, but children end up in forced labor, or kill the goblin, which would then put an end to the child labor, and then you put Victor in charge of the factory, but doing that everyone will eventually lose their jobs because he's pro-automation. In hindsight, I should have let Victor get lynched by the mob, and then killed the goblin. Sometimes a quest has no clear good outcome and you're choosing between the lesser of 2 evils. Depending on how you complete quests and who you side with, you'll add points to the magic vs technology meter. When I completed that factory quest the way that I did, it shifted the meter in favour of technology, and when the meter shifts in the favour of one over the other, it gives bonuses to characters whose class is on that side. Tech characters like my diesel engineer gain bonuses to their abilities if the meter is in the favour of technology, while mages gain bonuses to their spellcrafting if the meter is in favour of magic. And when the meter is balanced, neither side gain any bonuses. You can also affect this meter by repairing or breaking mechanisms around town or by interacting with magical rifts. Even though I sometimes didn't like the person I was involved with in a quest or what the outcome of the quest was looking like it was going to be, I almost always sided with the technology side as technology benefited my character since I was playing a diesel engineer. So I ended up making a lot of questionable decisions in the game just to gain combat benefits. As for quest rewards, more often than not, the quest rewards and loot drops almost always gave me Voodoo Shaman gear, which was useless to me in my party as nobody in my party was a shaman. I do think they could do a better job of maybe balancing quest rewards to be suited to your character and your class. I didn't touch much upon the crafting aspect of the game, as the few equipment drops I got for my character ended up being better than anything I could craft. That said, you won't have any issues crafting, as the vast majority of loot drops you find everywhere will be crafting materials. The game's performance was very mixed, and this is a big issue. My first day with the game, I spent 8 hours straight playing it on max settings with absolutely no performance issues whatsoever. The game ran perfectly and smoothly with zero issues. But when I went to play the game the next day, about an hour in, performance tanked to near unplayable levels. I started suffering constant dips and freezes. It was happening in combat, it was happening while I was running around town, the game was freezing while I was in conversations, the game was freezing while I was in the store and crafting menus. It didn't matter what settings I had enabled or disabled, it didn't matter how low I changed the graphical settings to, it didn't matter how low I set the resolution to. The game's performance suddenly went from running perfectly on max settings to barely running with constant stuttering and freezing, and the further I progressed, the more frequent the stuttering and freezing became. By the end of the early access build, it was freezing for several seconds every 5 seconds or so. I wasn't sure what was causing this, so out of curiosity, mid-playthrough while the game was stuttering and freezing, I decided to start a new save from the beginning of the game just to see if the stuttering and freezing would continue happening. I spent about 2 hours replaying the game from the beginning, and the game's performance went back to being perfect with no issues on max settings. I'm not sure what the cause of that issue is, but they definitely have some work to do regarding optimization. Overall, it's a great game, and performance issues aside, I had a lot of fun playing it. The game has a lot of potential, and I definitely see myself playing a lot more of it. The early access build will give you roughly 10 hours of gameplay. You could probably speed through it in 4 or 5 hours if you only focused on the main story, and maybe 8 to 12 hours depending on if you also played through the side content. That said, the early access build only contains the first act of the game, so there's plenty more to come. If you're interested in checking out the game, you can find it on Steam for $19.99, but as the game progresses in its development and it gets closer to release, the price will gradually increase. Are you planning on picking up the game? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.